My very first memories are when we lived in Stanton Avenue in Hornchurch, and I was, I suppose, about 4 or 5, and my Uncle George and Auntie Florrie were with us, and their daughter Elsie, and I pricked my finger. I had a thorn in it, and I still have the scar in my finger now.
Did the thorn come out?
My Auntie Florrie pulled it out, and I cried because it was bleeding, and she wrapped it all up, and she said, "Now you've got a nice dolly," and she put 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth on it.
Oh, how sweet.
And I went round all day looking at my finger because it had a nice dolly on it. And talking about dollies, I also remember my sister and I both had a dolly for Christmas. And my sister threw mine and broke it to bits. It was the first china dolly I'd ever had. My first day at school.
Can you remember that?
My first day at school was, I think it was September, I must have started, or March. Not sure which it was, September or March. But it was absolutely, it was a snowstorm. And we had to walk to school, and my mother had a very young baby. I should think it was Uncle Leslie, and so Margaret had to take me on my first day, and I cried all the way. I wanted to go home. I didn't like the snow. Margaret took me all the way home again, and Mum sent me back again. And I cried and I cried, and when I got there I was freezing cold, and the teacher sat me in front of the fire. They had great big open fires with fenders round them. And she put my chair there, and I sat there. She gave me a lovely rosy apple and said, I remember that because it was always an apple for the teacher, but the teacher gave me an apple.
Well, that was a good...
On this special May Day, Mum had made me up a basket of pansies from the garden to take along, because we were all asked to take flowers. And she made this basket of pansies, and it was a special basket which I still have today.
Really?
It was a wickerwork outside with coloured glass inside. Although the coloured glass now has a big hole in it, it's still got the exterior, and it's still a very pretty basket. And she filled these up with pansies, and mine was chosen as the best of the lot. And I had to place it on the piano that they were using to play the music for the Maypole dance. And I was so proud to think they'd chosen my basket. Mum and Dad were there to watch us too. We got a photograph somewhere with them at the May Day. Other thing I remember about the school is I started playing the violin, or learning to play the violin. And we had to do a concert in the school hall. And the piece of music, I couldn't read music. And they decided on a piece of music that I'd only just began to learn. And I could do the first few lines of it because I remembered those so la mi do sort of music. and I learnt it and wrote it on the paper. But I couldn't play the next one because I hadn't really rehearsed it and I had nothing written on the paper. So I spent the rest of the concert just moving my bow up and down and not making a sound.
I bet nobody knew.
No, they didn't know. But, and I never really mastered the violin properly anyway. And that violin is still up in our loft, and it's been around several members of the family, and they've all had a go at it. And the last one to play it was Kathleen's John. I can remember my brother Leslie, when he was at school, I was summoned to the infant school because my brother Leslie had a real silk blouse on, which was it was a blouse, and it got very, very creased. It was, I forgot what it was, the material, but
Silk.
no, it wasn't silk. It was, I've forgotten the name of the material, but it creases, and you can't get the creases out.
And he brought it to school?
He'd worn it to school as a shirt.
Right.
And his teacher was complaining about the shirt, and she pulled it out of his trousers and a penny dropped out. And she said, "Where did you get the penny from?" And he had a little girlfriend then, and she gave him the penny. And the teacher said he must have stolen it.
Oops.
And I had to take him home with a note from the headmistress to say that Leslie had stolen this penny and he wasn't to come back to school till he had his blouse ironed. It was a Sunday. We were walking home.
Yeah, go on.
And we passed a place where they had black currant bushes hanging out of the fence.
Yeah.
And I picked some black currants and popped them in my mouth.
Oh.
And after that, Auntie Margaret held it over me, and every time she wanted anything done, even for scratching her back, she'd say, "If you don't do it, I tell Mum you pinched the currants." And I was petrified that she was going to tell Mum I'd pinched these
What
currants.
meaning?
And she held it over me for 3 or 4 years, I think.
How old were you then?
5, 6.
Oh, you poor thing.
Another time we were going to school. I dare you to do so-and-so. And somebody said to me, "I dare you to knock that policeman's hat off." And I did. And I really got told off. But he was a friend, this policeman, and he always talked to us. He held our hands as we crossed the road, and we all felt safe with him. But he really told me off when I knocked his hat off. There was sandpits beside the station in Hornchurch, and we were going to school, and hundreds and hundreds of baby frogs were crossing the road. They all came from this sandpit. And another memory was walking to school, and we were outside the Home and Colonial in opposite where the theatre is now, almost. And there was a snake in the road, and a man from the Home and Colonial came out and stoned it. I remember my brothers, especially Brian, and he got told off because he used to do things like going and catching newts or little tiddlers from the pond, and he'd sell them on the way home from school.
To who?
To other children. And he used to play marbles and children that ran out of marbles, he'd get some out of his pocket and sell his marbles. He used to make quite a bit of money. Only a halfpenny a time, but a halfpenny was a lot of money in those days. We used to, if we earned any money, like I used to go shopping for a lady round the corner, and she'd give me a halfpenny or a penny, and we'd go up to the corner shop and buy a penny of biscuits. And we have a big bag of broken biscuits for a penny, and things like that. We used to go, be sent round to the baker's, which was called Price's Bakery, and it was a great big place. We used to go round with the pram and get about 10 loaves, because we were a big family. We had to get 9 of yesterday's loaves and 1 new one, which was for Dad. The next thing I remember was moving to Forest Gate when I was 6, and we lived with Granny and Grandma in 290 Romford Road, and we didn't really like it there because Granny and Grandma wouldn't allow us to do so many things. You know, we weren't allowed to play about in anywhere but in our room upstairs, and we daren't make a noise, and we couldn't play out in the yard because it was a builder's yard and there were rats in the yard. I remember my mother having a baby while we were there, and she was feeding it, and rats could smell her milk, and they came into the bedroom where she was feeding it. It was horrible. But
so were there 4 of you that moved there?
No, Stanley and Leslie were probably born in Hornchurch. It have been Graham.
I don't know what order you go in. Who comes first?
Stanley, Leslie, Graham, Dennis, Brian and Roger.
And Auntie Margaret's the eldest?
Yes. And I started my new school, which was the Grove Central School in Forest Gate. And I thoroughly enjoyed it there for a little while. And then we started doing fractions at school, and I couldn't understand them. And I went to almost to the bottom of the class. And I was so ashamed of being bottom of the class, I destroyed my you called it, report at the end of term, and didn't take it home. Following year, I had a new maths teacher, and I was fine with fractions, which was fractions and decimals, which were, I had a blockage on, and I came to second in the class. So that report went home.
So the report that didn't go home, did your mum and dad not ask, where's your report?
I expect they did, but I can't remember what happened. I can remember school dances, and I had my first long dress, which was a long green silk dress. And we used to walk to school, and I felt so proud in this dress. But the thing was, I wore it each year to the school dance. So I was wearing the same one every year. When we were living in Palmerston Road, we used to go over to Wanstead Flats a lot. It would be like Margaret would take us all over. We'd go on bicycles or walking or whatever. And we'd take tennis rackets and balls and play over there. It was quite a walk from home, but we thoroughly enjoyed it. And there'd be perhaps 2 or 3 of my brothers and Margaret and I. and we were mucking about playing tennis, and I think the ball was thrown and I was looking for it. And the grass was quite long, and we all separated, you know, looking for the ball, and suddenly a man that was in the long grass grabbed hold of me, and I just screamed. And I suddenly remembered I got the tennis bat in my hand, so I was bashing that about and waving it. Margaret saw it. She come running over, and this chap on the bike jumped on his bike and went. He didn't interfere with me or anything, but I don't know what he was going to do.
God, that was scary.
But she made us swear not to tell Mum and Dad, and Mum and Dad never knew. But that was just one episode I remembered about Forest Gate. Oh, and of course that's where I met Alison. She was a school friend from the age of 9. And I used to go round to Alison's every Friday night and have tea there. We always had chipolata sausages for tea, because they'd just come out new. They weren't known on the market. They were too dear for my mum to buy, and her mum used to buy them every Friday for our tea.
How exciting. What did you have with them?
I suppose we had chips, I don't know. Can't remember.
Did she have brothers and sisters then, or was she only
No, she was an only child.
Oh, I bet it was the right luxury for you then.
Oh yes, I used to love going over there. And I never told you about my friend Doris Shuttler that I had when we lived in Grandma's house. She lived just a little way up the road, and she was an only child. No, she had a big sister and a brother, Bertha and Edgar. But Doris was really the favourite, and they lived right opposite Singer's sewing shop. And every year they used to have a big doll in the window, all dressed in lovely clothes. But as it was the show one, Doris's mum used to get it every year for Doris. Every year she had a big doll. And I used to be so jealous, because all I ever had was a rag doll. And Doris and I belonged to a little club in the Baptist church, and we were doing a little play, and we were 8 little mothers. We all had to take our dolls, and I borrowed one of Doris's because mine was only a rag doll with a china head. And after that play, I asked for a doll for Christmas. I wanted a china doll, and I got another rag doll with a china face, and I didn't want it. In our stockings, a new penny, an orange, some nuts, and a chocolate Father Christmas. That was all we ever had in our stocking. And all we ever had for presents was perhaps a book and a box of paints, or a pencil case and a book. But that was all we had for Christmas. After that was, I think Grandad had a row, your Grandad had a row with Granny and your great Granny and Grandad, and we had to leave.
Do you know what it was about?
No idea. Money, I expect. I really don't know. And
the builder's yard was something that great granddad did, was it?
yes, and they had a shop. We had to, when we went to school or went out, we had to lift up a flap, which was a counter, as you go in the front door. Grandad was a builder, and he built houses round about in Essex. He built a house in Hornchurch, he built them in Loughton, and they were always called the Lilacs. So we always used to look out for houses called the Lilacs, and we traced them back to Grandad. I remember moving from Granny and Grandad's house, and we had to take everything by hand. And I remember pushing the pram with the baby in it, and having all sorts of bits and pieces of Granny and Grandad's home in the pram.
How far were you moving?
Well, it was in a short distance. Grandad was doing the basket work then, and he took the garage and the cellar. The cellar was for storing stuff. The garage was for the working people, you know, the people making the cots, and the front room and back room were the offices.
So was this a bought house or a rented house?
I presume it was rented at the time, but he bought it eventually, I think. Before we left Grandma and Grandad's house in Romford Road, I remember coming home from school and my father meeting us before we went indoors and said, "I want you to come to the post office with me and draw out all your savings," because he was so hard up he didn't have enough money to pay his workmen or buy any food. And both my sister and I had to draw out all our savings. Mine was about 16 shillings, and I don't know what Margaret had in her account, but now it seems a pittance, but then it was a lot of money.
So what did you use the savings for?
That I don't know. He didn't tell us what he used it for, but I know he was so hard up.
And did you ever get it paid back?
I didn't get it paid back until he died.
What, he remembered?
It was in his will.
To give you back your savings?
Yes, but what I didn't expect was the fact that we had no interest on it when he gave it back.
So you got your 16 shillings back?
When we were living in Forest Gate, we went for a drive to Southend, and we had my auntie and uncle in the car and all us children, and how we all got in the one car I do not know, because I can't remember what the car was.
Who was your aunt and uncle?
Auntie Dolly and Uncle Jim. And we'd had a nice day in Southend, and we'd been on all the Never Never Land games and swings and rides and things, and we started our way home and the fog came down, and the fog was so bad that Uncle Jim had to get out and walk beside the car with a torch for about 5 miles. He walked till we had a bit of lighting in the street. Every Sunday he used to take us out. We went to Sunday school. We went to Sunday school in the morning, and we belonged to a Baptist church that was at the top of our road, in Palmerston Road. And that was where we got all our charity clothes from.
Was it a stigma for you, or you didn't really, you were just grateful to get them?
Well, I suppose we didn't like wearing second-hand clothes. Margaret and I didn't. The boys didn't care. The whole of August holidays, we used to go on holiday camping. We had a great big bell tent, We all slept round this bell tent with our feet to the middle. And Mum and Dad had a little tent on their own. We used to go to Kent, usually.
So how did you all get in the car? What sort of car to get everybody in?
Oh dear.
Was it 2 journeys or?
No, it was one journey. We had quite a big car. And
Well, for 8 children, you need to have a big car.
no, we didn't have the 8 children then. Roger wasn't born, and Brian was the baby. So the baby was on Mum's lap.
So 6.
So 6, and 4 of them sat on the back seat, and Dad had put 2 Tizer boxes. There was, he used to buy Tizer for us, and there was space for 6 bottles of Tizer, and he put those in the back, and we sat on those. In 1939, we were on holiday in Ongar, and we never went back to Forest Gate.
Where would you have been on holiday in Ongar?
We were in a field opposite the White Bear in Ongar. We were camping.
And how old were you then?
12.
When war
13.
broke out, 12?
13. I was coming up to 14 because by the time we moved to Brentwood I was 14. We were in this camp for about August, September, to the end of September. The school holidays.
With your mum and dad?
Mum and Dad were travelling up to Forest Gate every day and leaving us there, and if we heard the air raid siren, we had to go across to the pub and get under the counters.
So the house was just locked up, but older Grandad was still working there?
Yeah, he was working there. And they came back to the camp every night. It wasn't far to come back.
Car?
Yes, we
Bus?
had a car. I don't think we ever went to the seaside. It was always a country holiday. And that's what we had in Stamford Rivers. And we had the same big bell tent and a small caravan. I can't remember what happened to all the caravan and the tents and that, because we never went camping anymore after that. Of course Dad wasn't going to take us back to Forest Gate, and he looked around and he found us a house in Brentwood, which was 62 Park Road, Brentwood. And we stayed there for 3 years. I remember I left school because my school was evacuated to Ledbury area, and my sister's school went, I think they went down to Dorset, and then they moved to Brentwood, and so I joined my sister's school. And all I can remember about that was we used to go to school in the morning to Brentwood Girls' High School, which was on the Common, and then from there we would walk to Brentwood Boys' School and have lessons there.
So the grammar school was
Yes,
corner.
the grammar school.
Yeah.
And it was all boys at the time. So we were quite proud to go to that school. And then we went down...
Proud or excited?
Well, I suppose excited to think we were going to the best school in Brentwood.
Oh, not the fact there were boys there.
Oh no, didn't bother about boys. Although we used to look down over the swimming pool from there, and we used to see the boys undressing in the cubicles.
What, you and Margaret?
Yeah. And then we went down to the Guido School, which a lot of people don't even know exists, and it's still there today, but I think it's a nursery school now.
You talking about in Brentwood?
Yes, it was in Primrose Hill. The only thing I remember about when we first moved to Brentwood Mum and Dad were still travelling back to Forest Gate for work. And I think myself, Stanley, Leslie and Margaret were all left in Brentwood overnight, and we were dared to go out in the garden and pick the apples.
By who?
My mum. But we went down and picked some lovely apples, crunched them all up and threw them the cores over next door's garden.